On July 21st, 2016, a thread would appear on 4chan's music board that went like this. Hey, I picked this up because it looked interesting. I wasn't able to find any references to it online whatsoever. Even with super obscure bands, you might expect to find an old MySpace page or mention in some forum. Does anybody recognize the album? I half expected it to be noise pop or some vaporwave wankery. Listening to it now, track 1 is hella lo-fi shoegaze with noise panning back and forth. This isn't some viral marketing bull. I'm just curious if anyone can shed some light on it, and I'm slightly excited by the prospect of owning a rare album. Replies below would ask for a rip of the album, and eventually OP would provide. Reactions were mostly positive, though some didn't like it, or assumed this was a cheap attempt at marketing an album. Most thought it was pretty cool though, and naturally they too searched for it online, but just like OP, they couldn't find it either. Nobody had ever heard of Panchiko, or their album, Death Metal. From there, a search would begin for this mysterious band, one that would take years and the participation of thousands of people. But in order to tell this story to its full extent, we can't start here, but instead we have to go back into the past, into a little country called England.
Get my Aprilla out and do burnouts on your front lawn, and then I'm gonna chuck mud bombs at your nan's windows, you silly bastards.
In the late 90s, 4 childhood friends would form a band while in high school. These 4 would be Owen Davies, Andy Wright, Sean Faraday, and a man named John, whose last name remains unknown to us to this day. The band they would form is, of course, Panchiko, which is a play on Pachinko, the incredibly popular Japanese game. That's an odd mix of gambling, arcade gaming, and noise. Lots of noise. This Japanese influence is apparent throughout the entirety of Panchiko, from the name, to the cover art of the first album, and even to their live performances, with them straight up having Evangelion as background visuals. The lead vocalist Davies has admitted to this influence and has cited things like Final Fantasy and Studio Ghibli as inspirations. With the 4 having started a band, naturally they wanted to do what everyone wants to do, play music live. Like a lot of bands, this started with live covers at bars and pubs and the like. Though they were actually underage, and this would get them removed from a battle of the bands, they would never find much success in the cover playing, and would eventually focus their efforts on their own music, using the money from those cover performances to record demos. It would be in the year 2000, only a couple years after their initial start in cover performances, that these efforts would be realized when they released Death Metal. Coming in at 18 minutes, with influences from the Beatles to Radiohead, and it also would include their iconic cover art, which comes from the manga Mint na Bokura, I think I pronounced that right, which ran from 1997 to 1999. This would be their first and only released EP before their disbandment. With about 30 copies made, most were sent out to labels and close friends. Unfortunately, they only received one reply from a label, but it was positive, but they remained unsigned. This is what the owner of the label said about them in his notes. Quote, "Death metal, of course, anything but death metal. Ha ha. Lovely sweet vocals, then some wiggy stuff. Needs a bit of va-va-va-voom on the vocal front. I really like this. It would make my ears stand on end if I heard it on the radio. Stabilizers for big boys equal great. Swearing plus ranting in a very familiar style. Laputa is lovely and slow. Bugger knows what they remind me of." Simon Williams, November 2000. You gotta hand it to the English people. Even in their written word, their accent comes through just as strong as ever. Having never gotten signed, they would set themselves back to work, both in terms of music, but also life, as in college and jobs. They did work on another EP titled Kicking Cars, but it would never release. Instead, later it would get repackaged into a deluxe of death metal, but more on that later. Eventually, childhood dreams faded, and the responsibilities and obligations of adulthood became too much. And in mid-2001, the band split up, with 3 of them pursuing college and part-time jobs wholeheartedly, and the 4th, John, enlisting in the military. Panchiko, as they knew it, was done. Owen Davies became a teacher, Sean Faraday a tree surgeon, John in the military, like I said, and the only one who stayed in music was Andrew Wright, who played in a band called Swimming and is a professional sound engineer. With that little backstory and the knowledge it provided, we must now jump from the year 2000 to the year 2016. Because 15 years after their disbandment, that 4chan thread would appear, asking who made it and where they could be found. It was here that search would begin, so let's examine what leads there were. First, the obvious, the band name. Of course, that didn't lead anywhere, but the back of the album was examined, and it was discovered that it listed 4 names. Unfortunately, it was only the first names. And it turns out in the UK, the names John, Sean, Andrew, and Owen are not exactly rare. It would be near impossible to track them down via first name alone in the entire country. The only way this would be possible would be to narrow it down somehow. This initial lack of information led a lot of people to assume this was a publicity stunt, and that was an opinion held by some for many years. Another opinion that would also later be proved wrong was the disc rot. The initial CD discovered when ripped was found to be heavily disc rotted, giving the music an odd vibe. Many would argue on forums if this was intentional or not, though of course nobody could really know, so they just argued. The initial Mewboard search went basically nowhere, with the thread eventually expiring and ending the search for a time. In fact, it wouldn't actually pick up until 2017 when a user by the name of Sticky would upload the full EP to YouTube, and this would get some decent traction, but still not enough for the mystery to be solved. It wouldn't be until 2019, on the 5th of August, when Sticky on another channel going by the name of Dismiss Yourself would upload the rip again, and this time having the YouTube algorithm bless them by deciding to show it to thousands of people. Two of those would be Toad and Zod. Now, Toad was a moderator of the r/LostWave subreddit, who shared the video to said subreddit. And Zod was someone who'd create the Panchiko Discord server, which was solely dedicated to solving this mystery. Zod would go on to post a link to r/LostWave, and Toad would see it, and from then on the two would work together on a search effort. Since there appeared to be no real hard evidence on who Panchiko's members were, other than those first names I mentioned, members of the server would spend their time searching indie musicians in the UK with the first names associated with the band. And as I mentioned earlier, that was pretty much impossible considering their names were John, Sean, Andrew, and Owen, all very common. Things would continue along this route of basically no new information until there was a sudden breakthrough, when someone was browsing an archive of the thread, and they noticed that somebody had asked if OP had gotten the CD from a Southampton Oxfam music store, as they just happened to recognize the cover art. This would lead a user of the server to email the shop manager, but unfortunately they claimed they had no record of the CD being in stock. But this breakthrough led to another breakthrough. Somebody noticed that there was a barcode on the CD itself, and that it wasn't actually an ID for the item, but a gift aid number, which is ID for the person who gifted it. That same Southampton stores emailed, but they explained that due to privacy laws, they could not share information on whoever donated the CD. They did, however, say that the numbers didn't even correlate with their store, so it didn't come from them. This meant that those numbers actually meant something, and they could be used to track down which store it came from specifically. Zod would then search up Oxfam 1510, which were the last four numbers of the gift aid code, and lo and behold, it led them to an Oxfam store in Nottingham, in particular the Sherwood district. Thankfully, said district only had a population of 15,000, so instead of even asking the Oxfam for any information, they just began searching for musicians again. But this time with a limited area, and specifically Owen, as the name is common but not as common as the others. And it wouldn't take long before they found the right guy. Toad would send Owen a Facebook message simply asking, "Hello, you'll probably never read this, but are you the lead singer of Panchiko?" To which Owen would reply with the simple one-word answer, "Yeah." And in that moment, the search ended. From the 21st of July to the 21st of January 2020, or 1,279 days. None of the members had any idea about any of this. They had never released death metal online, and the band had been disbanded since 2001. I can only imagine how odd it must have been to receive a message about something only close friends and family should have known about, and that you created when you were 17 years old. Davies would then answer some questions, including a long-running one, which was the disc rot meant to be there? To which he answered no, and then followed up by saying he didn't want anyone to hear the original, and he didn't even own a copy anyway. But being a good sport, he did offer to get in contact with the other band members. Unfortunately, none of them had a copy either. Davies did, though, elaborate on some other things, such as mentioning Kicking Cars, which was their second EP that had never been released, and clearing up some of the lyrics. While the trio did initially state their preference for the disc-rotted version and how it added something to the piece, and they feared it might lose it if a remastered version was to come out, they would eventually relent, and Andrew, who worked as a sound engineer, set himself to remaster the original EP. This was at first pretty difficult, as they didn't have the masters anymore, but luckily a friend still had a copy in good condition, and Andrew would remaster the original EP and Kicking Cars, releasing it as one full package. On the day of its release on Bandcamp, it would become one of the best-selling albums, and the physical CDs would sell out, leading Davies, Wright, and Faraday to meet back up, and together they recorded and released a live studio version of Death Metal to YouTube, which would also be uploaded to Spotify and Bandcamp in 2021. Later in 2020, they would also release several remixes done by fans in a collection called Death Metals. It should be mentioned at this point that while all this was going on, Panchiko had never shown their faces, thinking that their age would not fit the image of their past music. But after several practice sessions and the hiring of new members, they would play their first show and show their faces. This occurred on December 5th, 2021 in their hometown of Nottingham. The crowd had several hundred people and was totally sold out. Several months later, they would play in London, and months after that, in October of 2022, they would embark on their first tour, which was centered in the United States. They even played at South by Southwest. Flash forward to May 5th, 2023, and Panchiko would release their debut album, Failed at Maths, and then later embark on their second tour, which once again took place in the US. And as of today, they still have more shows scheduled in 2023 in Europe. Since we're at present day, we should discuss how wonderful of a story this really is. Panchiko will go down in the history books of music. A band founded by 17 and 18-year-olds who then abandoned that childhood dream for more realistic goals, till one day the dream came to fruition 20 years later. I know the internet is a messy place, full of toxic fools, schizos, and all sorts of strange miscreants. But this is a good story. It's genuinely wonderful to hear. Not only was it a fascinating mystery to solve, but the fact that the music is actually good was an added bonus. I'm not really sure how to end this video, so I guess I'll say one of those generic sayings about never giving up on your dreams, because you'd be surprised at what can happen. Since this is my most recent video since the milestones, I want to say thank you for 2,000 subs, and also to mention there will be more lolcow videos, if you want to call them that. So if you subscribe for that sort of stuff, don't worry, it's coming. I've got several candidates in mind, some old, some young, including a fascinating one from the 20th century, who I don't think gets enough recognition. So this was just a fun little video, so look forward to some of that other stuff in the near future, and thanks for watching.